So I'm thinking, I've already alienated you. You've already immediately gone, what does that mean? And actually, if you were in the audience, you might be thinking, what does that mean? Should I know what that means? But I never learnt it because I thought, oh, I'll be in the cupboard singing with the microphone and I will never forget the feeling when they turned off all the lights in that cupboard. And I was like, nobody briefed me on this.
I think that's what maybe puts some people off in terms of starting, because they think, right, I'm going to write my speech or I'm going to write my talk now, and by the end of it, it's going to be finished.
That's something that a lot of people say. Once the first couple of minutes are over, I'm fine. And actually, you don't have a couple of minutes.
But if you're someone who works in maybe more of a corporate world and they have to do a presentation on Zoom in front of their colleagues at the drop of a hat, or they've got to do it tomorrow, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, I haven't got time, I won't be able to do this, and find that motivation to take that first leap of faith.
Do you know, the thing that I always think about, and this is the power of marketing, do you know the brand Ronseal?
I don't.
It's paint.
I don't know how to start.
Where do I start?
Where do I start?
When we were thinking about this episode, what does that spark in you? Where do I start?
It actually makes me feel quite excited, because for me, the start is probably the most exciting bit, because it's taking the leap of faith and it's like kind of jumping into it. And it's like a blank canvas. And I actually find that bit quite fun. I actually don't find it that daunting anymore, but I did used to find it quite daunting.
Yeah, that's where we're opposites. Is that I feel like, oh my God, there is this blank canvas, this sort of empty house that I've got to furnish. And I find it really overwhelming starting, because everything's up for grabs. So I feel like because there's so much up for grabs, I have no idea where to start. And so I don't know if you're like this, but I kind of feel like, right, everything's got to be perfect. I've got to, so it's probably the most productive in terms of cleaning and chores I ever am, is if I actually have something like a talk to prepare for. I will clean the fish tank, or I will set up my desk. I'll be like, right, okay, I'll start, but after I clean my desk. I'll start, but after I organise my calendar. I'll start, but after, and it just keeps sort of spiralling.
I think, yeah, and I think that's why we wanted to do this episode, because I can imagine a lot of people would be feeling the same thing in terms of, I don't really know where I'm going to begin with this. There's so many things I want to say or could say, but how do I know what the most important thing to say is?
Yes.
And I think it's about, like, we've spoken about this before, that I think we're all natural born storytellers, evolutionary as people. I think we're better storytellers than that, what we actually think we are sometimes. And I think a lot of it is, the more I did it, in terms of writing things and editing videos and stuff, the more I realised a lot of it is just quite instinctual. And I think it's about trusting that gut feeling sometimes. And I think sometimes you overthink that thing too much.
Yeah, that's a huge element, isn't it? Trust. So there's two things going on. There's two kind of questions that I think are sparked by this, where do I start? One is about motivation for me. Like, how do I actually get up the guts to sit down and focus? And then the other one is, what's the first words? What are the first words I'm going to say? So like for this podcast today, there's probably loads of kind of assumptions of how to start, right?
Yeah.
Like all of the podcasts that we've listened to before, like Stephen Bartlett, or I don't know, what are some of the podcasts that you listen to?
The IGN podcast, they're like a gaming podcast.
Right, yeah.
Or
so how do they start?
They start by, they just say the title of the podcast. They go, hello, welcome to the IGN podcast. My name is so-and-so and so-and-so. I'm joined by the wonderful. So it's very kind of like game showy, traditional, how you'd imagine a TV show to kind of begin, maybe.
And that's kind of how people assume that presentations start, right? I don't know if you've seen many presentations, but I've seen quite a lot now. The idea is, well, first I'm going to introduce myself, I'm going to welcome everyone, and then I'm going to go on to the topic at hand. And I think by that point, our attention spans are so short that we've already kind of lost people by that point.
I agree, because I think if you were saying, hello there, my name is Luke Davis, I'm going to talk today about the history of paper, the audience knows that's what the talk is about because they are there sat listening to you.
Yeah.
People in, best man speeches don't say, hello, I'm the best man and I'm going to say a speech now. They start with a joke, start with a quip, start with a funny thing to make everyone feel relaxed. And I don't know where that formality comes from. Maybe it's...
I don't know where that's come from. The idea that... Do you know, actually, I'm going to say as a bit of a hunch, I think that's come from the idea that we need to rest on that warming up into it. And we go, right, well, I know what my name is. I know, I know that I can say hi. And then after that point, it's like, right, well, after we've done this warming up, then that's something that a lot of people say. I don't know whether you come across this a lot, where they say, once the first couple of minutes are over, I'm fine. And actually, the thing that I say, and it might sound a bit harsh, is you don't have a couple of minutes. You have 30 seconds.
Yeah.
The kind of first impressions, there's some alarming research where it's like you have a 1/10 of a second to make your first impression. And then it will take something like 15, 20 minutes to shake that, because we think we're really good judges of character. So we kind of stick to our guns. So that's interesting, the kind of what is the first thing that we should say. I think that's a good myth to debunk, is that we need to warm up into it.
Yeah, I don't think we necessarily... It depends what you're doing. I think if you're creating content online, I think you should get to the point as quick as possible, because you're competing with a lot of other pieces of content, which are going to be, let's face it, everyone is kind of hunting for that kind of dopamine hit or dumping.
They're just dumping.
Oh, they're just dumping. I love as well the word dump has now become a phrase to describe putting a lot of content online. When I was growing up, a dump meant something different.
It's my brain dump.
But what I was saying was that when I make my content online, I try and get to the point of what I'm talking about really quickly. And it's kind of an introduction. I do a lot of history videos. So I'd say something like 5 things you didn't know about Wales. It's quite quick. It's kind of like a formal introduction, but it goes straight to the point. And also I'm setting up the rules so the viewer or listener knows what it is they're going to get from this video.
Yeah, they won't be surprised. They'll be like, hey, he just did 6.
Yeah.
You're kind of teaching them how to listen then, aren't you? Priming them. Do you know, the thing that I always think about, and this is the power of marketing. Do you know the brand Ronseal?
I don't.
It's paint for like outdoor spaces, for like fences and stuff.
Ronseal. Right.
And the advert is, or the kind of like tagline is, does exactly what it says on the tin. And I think that goes through my mind every time. I want the audience to think she just did exactly what she said on the tin.
What?
Does that make sense?
I think so.
Ronseal does exactly what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
So like you're kind of just, everything about your first impression is exactly what the whole talk is going to be about.
I get what you mean.
That's a weird analogy, but it's kind of
yeah. No, I get it.
It's like when I did screenwriting, one of the rules that just kind of landed with me, and I was like, oh my gosh, every film does this, is the first image sums up what the film is going to be about. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, every single film does that.
Dunston checks in.
What's the Dunston checks in? Yes. So there's like that hotel bing bell, service bell. They ring it and it doesn't work, right? There's all this prestige and it goes do this build, and then they ring it and it doesn't work and they have to flip it over and kind of adjust something. That is the film, right? Is this prestige, this beautiful hotel? I mean, this is a niche film. I really hope people.
If people don't know what Dunston checks in is, there's 3 people who've seen this film: you, me, and the editor, and that's it. It's basically a monkey who kind of lives in a hotel. It's a weird film. It's from the 90s. And
it shows our age.
But the first scene is a bell that looks really pretty and pristine, but it doesn't work because it's basically a posh hotel, but everything goes wrong. But like you say, that's like, if you're thinking about where you're going to start and how do I start this, like one anecdote or one example of where I wasn't quite sure how to write my best man speech for my best friend Philippe. And I know he loves Lord of the Rings. So instantly I knew, right, I'm going to start the speech with the Lord of the Rings quote, and I'm going to end with the Lord of the Rings quote. And already I've got like a bit of a blueprint or a skeleton.
Yes.
And I've personally found that really helpful because it gives me a parameter to work within.
Some rules.
So that was a good place for me to start.
Do you know, I think that's a really good tip, because if you don't have those self-imposed, you can sort of ask for them as well. So I think if you're doing a talk, say you've been invited and they're like, oh, can you talk about this subject? We really like, we're doing an event and they're not really sure. Asking them questions to go, well, when you first thought about me being a speaker, what was it that you were attracted to? Is there a specific video that's online that drew you in, or do I talk about certain things or whatever? A lot of people just go, yeah, whatever you want. But actually, if you keep asking those questions, that's something that I've learned recently is, otherwise you kind of just go off into space and you're like, oh my God, I don't have any form of scaffolding or recipe. But those rules form a little bit of a recipe, right? And I think you also said something interesting there about knowing where to start and knowing where to end. This is so underrated in terms of, it's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, like finding the edges. If you find the edges, the rest of the middle is kind of going to take care of itself, right? And I think often we talk about presentations or talks and we go, right, I'm just going to focus on the middle bit where I get to my argument, but not knowing how to start and not knowing how to finish are things that I see all the time. They're like, again, that's a kind of warming up into it. And then that kind of lack of big finish. So yeah, jigsaw puzzles is the other metaphor.
That's a nice way to think about it. Yeah. Is that what you do when you like write stuff, or you've got to prepare for anything, or you've got to present something? Is it you start with the end or is there like because there's another way to do it? Like you could think of like, not that we go too like kind of in depth this, but the 3 acts of a story or like story structure that can sometimes help people. Like, is it something you use?
Yeah, I think thinking about the beginning and thinking about the end has been a really good piece of self-imposed like scaffolding. As I say, I call it scaffolding because I feel like there's kind of freedom within that to design whatever you like. So actually I'm thinking about it now, like what do I do now? Yeah, I bring in as many rules as I possibly can to go, let's make it, I'm going to talk for 5 minutes. That's a rule. I'm going to talk, I'm going to get to the point as quickly as possible. I might include a story, or a big part of it is as well is like knowing why you're talking. So I might just kind of mind map a couple of like who, what, why, when, hows, and kind of exercise the monkey mind. That's the mind that freaks out typically and goes, oh my God, I can't do this. I've got so many questions, unanswered questions. And, but a lot of those rules can be generated from things like, where is it? How many people are you talking to? Who are you talking to? Is it relevant to them? They kind of come thick and fast in the moment of when we're, in the room preparing to talk. But actually, often we don't take that time in the cool light of day to ask those questions and exercise the monkey mind, if you like. And that's where I think we go wrong, is when we're in that moment as we're speaking in front of other people and we're like, oh God, I haven't answered all these questions. And you think, I wish I'd done that before.
Yeah.
So actually, weirdly, putting yourself out there doing a talk and then logging all the things you think you should have done before is probably the random way that I do it a bit backwards now.
Right.
So whenever I do a talk, I say, fresh after it, I think, what am I going to do next time? Because I'm so in the like, oh, I wish I'd have done this last time to prepare for that. So I create a little bit of a log as well, actually. Now, in terms of, that's kind of like where to start in terms of like a bit of structure.
Yeah.
I want to talk about motivation.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that is something that people go, oh, I just don't feel motivated to start, or life gets in the way. How do you make this a priority? Especially when like public speaking, like I know it's your job, but for many people, it's part of their job and it's not necessarily seen as the most important part.
Good point. Yeah.
Whereas it is. But yeah, motivation.
I think that's a big point, because as part of what I do, I like part of what I do is like setting time aside to like look through a script or to like write an idea. Like it's part of my kind of routine. But if you're someone who works in maybe more of a corporate world and they have to do a presentation on Zoom in front of their colleagues at the drop of a hat, or they've got to do it tomorrow, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, I haven't got time, I won't be able to do this, and find that motivation to take that first leap of faith. And I think it is about having that leap of faith as well, like having that moment of clarity and saying, this isn't going to be perfect, but I'm just going to step out regardless. Like one of my favorite films is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where it's only a leap from the lion's head will he prove his worth, and he, spoiler alert, steps out, does a leap of faith, and then ends up saving his dad as a result. And it's my favorite Indiana Jones film. But in terms of getting motivated, I think people underestimate how long this stuff takes.
Oh,
like, so
massively.
I think the first thing you've got to do is block out some time, and don't underestimate it. This is going to take time. You know, like I did a talking with a Tidwell recently where I had to talk about quite personal stuff. And I blocked out like the whole morning just to get ideas written down. So for me, it would be block out some time, be really, really kind to yourself in terms of that. And also maybe follow what Roald Dahl did when he was writing his books. Make a nest, make a comfy little seat. You've got a cup of tea or a coffee. Good. Maybe away if you can. I know it's quite hard for some people who've maybe got families and stuff, but try and block out a time where you can be on your own without interruptions, without your phone, and just let yourself sit there with your thoughts. Because we don't have that much these days because we have phones all the time. We're constantly kind of engaged in something. So having that moment of clarity, and like this is quite nice here to have.
Oh my gosh, it's a dream.
We said when we first came in, because
it's like meditative, isn't it? Because it's like white noise. There's no. I find that on an aeroplane.
Oh yeah.
So I do my best work on an aeroplane, and I've realised it's the white noise. It's just the, and you can't really speak to each other, so you have to just go into your own sort of hole. Coming back to that jumping off point, the leap of faith. I remember going to Lanzarote in October, and I remember seeing all these people jump off the side of, like, I don't know, like the harbour or whatever. It wasn't that big a jump. It was probably about 8 foot. And the longer I left it, at first I was like, this is exciting, I'm going to do this, it's going to be really fun. The longer I left it, the worse it got, to the point where I sat there for so long that I burnt so badly. I remember just like, and then I just went into this spiral of like shame. Will I ever be able to jump? Will I ever, whatever? And I just thought, this is exactly what it feels like. So actually, I think it's like taking those little leaps as well. Like we kind of associate it with a big jump, and it becomes kind of, oh, well, I've got to do this perfect presentation. Actually, can you do 10 minutes? We both use those little timers, and I think they're brilliant. And actually, as you were talking, I was thinking about when you said that sort of sacred space where like there's no interruptions. I use an app called Opal.
Yeah.
And that makes it impossible for me to use my apps. So I need it to be like, not any, I'd need one of those like phone cells or something like that, where it's like I cannot get to my phone. And that's something that I find really, really useful, is like, how can you make the parameters? And actually, it's a very kind thing to do for yourself, isn't it? It's a very generous thing to do.
Yeah.
To be like, this is my time.
Yeah.
Even if it is 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we have to bear in mind as well, like the time stuff. I think that's what maybe puts some people off in terms of starting, because they think, right, I'm going to write my speech, or I'm going to write my talk now, and by the end of it, it's going to be finished. Like, do you realise how long it takes for TV shows and films to be made and created?
Yeah.
And like when I started, I did a talk recently, and I blocked it a couple of hours for it. And instead of coming away at the end with a talk, I just sat down and spewed all my ideas onto the page. And I was talking out loud.
Yeah.
Most of it was rubbish. I was like rambling, writing everything I could. I do the same method. This is a bit of a niche example, but when I do a lot of video editing as well.
Yeah.
And I use the exact same method. I get all my clips and I overfilm, probably a bit too much, and I get it all in the timeline. I have a look, and then I just whittle it down. But the first thing I do is get everything on paper, no judgment. That's how Writer's Room operate as well. Like, I've seen a documentary how they make the South Park episodes. I know it's a bit of a lowbrow example, but I think the writers of South Park are such, like, they just sit in a room and they just chuck out ideas, and most of them don't even land. And I think I was so lucky to have had that luxury. My first job was at a local TV station, and my first job was Daniel Glynn, and he was a TV presenter in the 90s. He still does stand-up now.
Your first job was Daniel Glynn.
My first job was Daniel Glynn.
I was Daniel Glynn.
I was him. So he was my first. he was my first boss.
Oh, I see.
And
Your
he
first
was
boss.
like, and he used to basically make writer's room a thing, and I didn't know what a writer's room was. And it was basically sat in a boardroom, which we weren't technically supposed to be in because we weren't paying rent on it. But that's fine. That's all in the past. And any ideas, no matter what it was welcome, and there was no judgment. Maybe there was like, that's not going to work, and move on. And I think you need to have that. Don't like hold on to your ideas and get rid of that precious element of it. And also, it's almost like, don't take your rejection to your ideas personally. And if you show it to someone else, don't take that person either. It's not because they don't think you're any good. It's just they don't think that idea is any good. And that's what I think maybe a difference is. But when you first start off, that idea can feel quite daunting because you think that everything you write has got to be perfect. And that's never the case, ever.
Yeah. I think that idea of throwing things at the wall has been really beneficial to me as well. Actually, it's like, can it be, is it kind of useful to be in the space? Or also, can it, do you know, it's this weird idea that I have of like, when I go shopping, if I go shopping, it's a rarity, I get kind of overwhelmed, and then it's like, I need to pick the best outfit and whatever. And actually now what I've done is just pick everything up that I like, walk around the shop with it, go try it on. Some of it will land, some of it won't. And then I'll walk around the shop once more, kind of victory lap. And then I'll go, right, which ones do I have to get? Well, not have to, but which ones I like have made the cut. And I think it's a little bit like what you're saying, that it's that sort of sieving for gold, isn't it? Like you're little by little, like first of all, you kind of just dredge everything up and there's dirt and dust and mud and whatever. And then eventually rinsing it through. But that takes time, doesn't it? That sieving for gold.
Like an Oakwood.
Oakwood.
Do you remember that?
That is literally what I think of. I think of like 6-year-old me sieving for gold. Also, I thought I was on such a huge mission. Did you feel like that?
Yeah, for people who don't, like, maybe there's people listening who are from Wales. Oakwood is like the only theme park in Wales. A lot of people hate Oakwood because if you compare it to like Gotland Towers or like, sorry for anyone who works in Oakwood. No,
it's charming.
I may not have that bit in where I say Oakwood for a bit. Oakwood, for people who don't know, Oakwood is like the only theme park in Wales, really. So it's the only choice we had. So every school trip was in Oakwood.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you had the same experience, but I was so scared of rides that I'd go on. There was one ride called Treetops, and it was kind of like the easiest roller coaster.
It was beautiful. It's more like a tour.
Yeah.
It wasn't a roller coaster.
But I'd gone on it so much. I knew every tree. I knew the squirrels by name. The guy knew who I was.
Genuinely.
And
the
also,
photos weren't like, you know, crazy arms up in the air with your like expression of like, I'm going to die. It was way more like, wee. It's just so angelic, isn't it?
Just somber.
I miss Treetops. I would go on Treetops now.
I miss Treetops. And I do miss Oakwood. I wouldn't mind going back. But in Oakwood, there was an activity you could do if you were too scared to go on the rides, where you could go in this weird... It was almost like a Wild West
It was.
area,
it was like oldie worldy
and
Wild
you could
West.
sieve for gold. And you'd get this kind of, I guess, sieve, for lack of a better word.
It's a sieve.
It was a sieve, innit?
Obviously, it's a sieve.
And you would just like shake these rocks back and forth and you'd find nuggets of gold.
Yeah.
And right next to it was the ghost train, which I was also too scared to go on.
Oh my God, me too. I remember the first time I went on the ghost train. I was in the first and last time I went on the ghost train because someone forced me. I was in the footwell.
Yeah.
And I remember my friend touching me and I was like, no! But yeah, sieving for gold, I genuinely thought that would be my career. I was like, why isn't everyone doing this, suckers?
So satisfying.
So satisfying. But how satisfying it is, that sort of satisfaction when you've been sieving and digging, and then you're like, that little nugget, although it took me a long time, it's worth it. I think we're in such an instantaneous world that we don't have the patience to wait for those nuggets, to refine them.
Yeah.
You know, when we see these speakers, these incredible speakers that are you know, they have their own YouTube channels and things like that, and they're touring all around the world. I think the assumption as well is that this is just a fresh thought. They haven't worked on it. They haven't been motivated to go, let's make this better each time. Let's listen to what the feedback is from the audience, where they smile, where they laugh, or where they're kind of leaning in. And I think that is part of the motivation, actually, because if you can imagine that audience, because of your hard work that you've put in now, that boring hard work, are gonna have that big reaction. If you can keep that visual going, I actually think that's what keeps me going, is like I have the opportunity to appreciate someone's attention.
Yeah. Okay. I think I know what you mean. So
that was our anticlimax. Wow. That was like, you know, they're gonna be there. They're gonna be in the palm of my hand. Yeah, I guess I'm just reading a script.
No, sorry. No,
I don't think you find it difficult to be motivated, because you've gone from trying to find the motivation to forging discipline. And I think when motivation fails, discipline is in the back pocket.
Or sometimes fear kicks in.
Oh, fear.
You know, because I've only worked, my first job I worked with deadlines. So it wasn't a case of how do I start? It was a case of I must start or I'm going to get sacked. Because I had to hit deadlines. So I worked in a news service technically. So I had to make weather forecasts and they had to go up by a certain time. So for me, I actually found a looming deadline was actually quite helpful. Live events is the ultimate deadline, because ready or not, you're going. I remember when I did the 100, which is the cricket tournament, and that was one of the first live events I did. And I got the call to do it at 4 o'clock the afternoon. I was supposed to be there at 7 o'clock the next morning. I got there and they had to do some like tech runs and stuff, and timing didn't quite go to plan. And I was halfway through like rehearsing my first big live event, and they had to open the doors and we had to stop rehearsals. And something in my mind went, there's no going back. You have to start.
That feeling.
And in a way, that buzz of that deadline or that live event happening is actually quite fun once you get used to it. But initially, of course, it's scary.
And actually, thinking of this, you've like awakened a memory of when I was younger. I got my first kind of main part in a play.
Yeah.
And I was like, finally, they see my talent. Finally, I'm being recognised. And I remember there was this first song, and it was like the intro to the play. So I was like, I'm holding this guy up. This is amazing. But I never learnt it because I thought, oh, I'll be in the cupboard singing with the microphone. And I will never forget the feeling when they turned off all the lights in that cupboard. And I was like, nobody briefed me on this. And I made it up and then hummed part of it.
Oh my gosh.
And I will never forget that feeling of being completely unprepared. So actually, you know, when you said about looming deadline and kind of fear as a motivator,
yeah,
I do think there is an element of that comes into it for me. But actually, now that I've done this a bit more, the joy of feeling like I gave that everything way outweighs the fear for me.
Yeah. Like, I don't think you find it hard. I don't think you find it hard to be motivated either. Like, I joke about the fear being my motivation, but it's also because I actually find it quite fun. And it's, if I don't start, then I'll stop doing what I love.
Yeah.
And that sounds, it's almost like if I stop and I don't start, then I cease to be someone who is creating something. And I pinch myself every day that my job is presenting or performing and making stuff and being in the creative world. Even just that enough is almost like a gift to me. But other people may not have that same thing and they've got to do it for work and they don't really want to do it. So I get the motivation is different. But do you find it hard to get motivated and for you to start sometimes, or do you find it quite easy and natural? It seems like it comes across that you just go into it, and sometimes I see you go into like this hole and you don't breathe and you don't eat, and then all of a sudden you come out like, where have you been? Oh my god, I've been in the world of writing or whatever.
Yeah, I have to go into it. Very much have to bully myself into it.
Bully yourself?
Yeah, like, let's go. Now it's much more okay. When I first started, I feel like people can empathize with the kind of cruel inner voice.
Yeah.
For sure. It was like, why don't you just do it? Like, you're so stupid. How can't you get started? And I say this like this, not for, you know, people to feel sorry about this. I actually think if you listen to your inner voice, for a lot of people, they're venomous. They're really, really dark. And actually, this is something, there was like an analogy that I heard of where people say it's like getting in a boxing ring every time. And what you're doing by developing the skills through, you know, better processes and things like that when it comes to public speaking is you're kind of getting bulkier to go back into the ring each time to fight those demons. So actually, for me, there was a lot of demons at first. There was a lot of, this won't be good enough. How can I make this perfect? How aren't you good at this already? Why can't you just get going? Why are you always so distracted? Now it's much more like, please don't watch any more episodes of Modern Family. Please just get going, because the audience deserve it. So actually the focus is way less on me.
Yeah.
It's way more on who I'm doing it for and how I can appreciate their time and their effort for coming and switching off their phone and listening.
Yeah.
Or stopping the scroll on Instagram. I'm like, thank you. I'm going to make this worth your time.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really kind that you've stopped.
I like you say about the resilience thing. I think that's really important, because I think when people get worried about starting, I think you have to remember is that when you start, that will be the hardest that process will ever be. Yeah. It's only ever going to get easier, yeah? I remember the first time someone asked me to make an edit. So I use the same brain to edit than when I do when I'm writing something, by the way. My boss said to me, can you edit this thing? And I said, I don't know how to edit. I don't know where to start. And he goes, you do. Just trust yourself. Just give it a go. You do know. You just think you don't. And I gave it a go, and it wasn't amazing. But that was the hardest starting point I've ever had. And since then, it's got progressively easier. Yeah. And the reason why I think I'm quite motivated to just do it, because I trust myself and I've had enough knocks. And maybe it's a weird analogy, but I think it kind of works, is I was genuinely terrified in Oakwood and going to theme parks before going on rides. Yeah. And I'd think about my stomach is going to do that horrible feeling. I'm going to feel out of control. I'm going to scream. I'm going to hate it. It's going to be scary. I'm going to fall out. I'm going to be embarrassed. What if I throw up? What if I don't like it? What if the ruggedness of it hurts my back? I don't know. And I remember waiting and like contemplating and waiting. And I'd go on one of the roller coasters, Megaphobia. I'd go on it once, and it would be like bam, 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 bam. And I want to go on all of them.
You got the strut on.
And then it was just that first sting of, how do I start? How do I get over that first hurdle? It's really hard, especially when you're in that moment of doubt. And I don't exactly know what to say to get out of that, because when you're in it, it can be really hard. But sometimes it's about taking a breath and just like taking that leap of faith and just trusting that it is going to be okay. But in the moment, I do appreciate it can feel quite daunting and hard. But remember, that will be the hardest it will ever be.
And it'll also be the most rubbish it'll ever be.
Hopefully.
I think that. I'm like, do you know what? I'm going to do it. So one of the things that I do is I just set up record, and I imagine, right, well, I have to do it now. And imagine if I didn't have all the prep time, and I record myself. Often I do this driving, to other drivers' delight. They see me muttering away like la 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 in the car. But I kind of feel like it's a bit ridiculous that we write talks down. Like, there's a difference with jotting things down so you don't forget and whatever, like triggering words and sentences and research data, stuff like that you really have to get right. There's a difference between that and scripting. So what I do is auditorily script. So I'm in the car and I'm thinking these things out loud rather than writing them down. Because I always find it a bit wild that when it comes to dancing, we don't write a dance. We just dance. So I don't get where the difference comes in with talking. Something that we do every day and that we don't do with much thought. We kind of think, right, well, I've got to sit down and write a script for this, rather than just get up and almost jump ourselves. It comes back to that jumping. Jump ourselves into the final environment where that talk is going to live. It's going to be out loud. So you can feel how certain words feel in your mouth, right? So if I used a certain piece of vocab when I'm driving in the car and muttering away that feels really unusual, I will equally say to myself out loud, that was a bit weird. I've never used that word before. But if it's just a simple, direct word, I'm not going to alienate the audience. It's going to feel more comfortable. I don't have to think about, oh, it's that classic one that comes up in school, isn't it? It's just popped into my head. Anti-disestablishmentarianism.
What does that mean?
Do you know what? It's a bit of a like paradoxical word, I feel. Because it's anti-disestablishmentarianism. I'm not going down this road.
I actually don't even know
It is
what...
something about the establishment and dismantling it, but maybe it is for or against. I've never used it in a sentence. So if you're going anti-disestablishmentarianism.
Anti-disestablishmentarian. So is it anti-disestablish? Is it against breaking down establishments or for it?
I don't know. So
right, okay.
I could use another word. So I'm thinking, I've already alienated you. You've already immediately gone, what does that mean? And actually, if you were in the audience, you might be thinking, what does that mean? Should I know what that means? Am I, stupid for not knowing what that means? Whereas I could just say, these policies, policies sounds a bit weird in my mouth. I could say something like, instead, I'm against these certain policies.
Right.
So I want to take action or, whatever.
Is it because
it's getting back to that simplicity. I think simplicity is way harder.
Was it Einstein who said that as well?
Yeah, so he said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Clearly, I don't understand anti-disestablishmentarianism enough to explain it to you. I was like, oh, crumbs.
This is my Uncle Bill and my anti-disestablishmentarianism.
Yeah, I was like, oh, God,
Are we stupid for not knowing what that means? I don't think we are.
But again, yeah, I'd go for the simple. But equally, in your industry, simple might be talking about deoxyribonucleic acid.
Yes.
Or why am I coming up with all the big words?
Don't know.
Just this bank.
Is that about knowing your audience? Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's a nice way to start as well.
Knowing your audience and knowing you, like what feels comfortable to say. So I would say that's how I do it. Is I like dare myself. Imagine if it was today and you have to go for it. What would you do?
Yeah,
and in those sorts of heightened, activated moments where you're just thinking, right, I've just got to do it. I've just got to jump. Loads of stuff comes out. Really creative, exciting nuggets when you've sieved for that goal. They already exist. So that's really cool. So a book that has always stuck with me is Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. I don't know if you've read it, but my copy of this is just falling to pieces. It's so good. And basically one of the premises that this book centers on is if on your to-do list you have eating a frog, you might as well get it over with because it's going to be uncomfortable. And actually, if you eat the frog, this is a horrible analogy, I know, but it's kind of very visceral. If you eat that frog and that was difficult and you do it first, you're going to be energized for the rest of your day. And this goes into things like dopamine hacking, which we're not going into now, but you'll congratulate yourself for doing the hard thing first. So now I think, what's the frog? So a frog isn't cleaning your desk. A frog isn't organizing your calendar. That's a nice thing. Like that's something that you can do on another day that helps your processes, right? Eating that frog is actually linked to just sitting down and doing it, doing the thing that you need to do.
Unless you're French. They love frogs. That may be the last thing on their list because they're saving up for it.
Maybe that's their reward. Who knows? Now, they also says, this is a lovely bit, it also says, if you have 2 frogs, pick the biggest, ugliest one and eat that first.
There you go.
So I just always think that, eat the frog.
Perfect.
Get it done.
And if you're not quite sure where to start and you're still thinking, where do I go with all this information? I would just say, do a Rodal and set up a nice nest for yourself and see where that takes you.
So would you say that's for like the motivation to start?
Absolutely.
Prepare your bits and bobs, just have them around you so that there's no excuses.
Make a nest, no distractions, quiet, simple. He didn't even sweep his floor in his little shed. All his pencils are sharpened. Your laptop is charged. You're nice and set up. And spend a couple of hours in there. And even if you don't write a single thing, just let your thoughts just settle. And I promise that will help.
Yeah. And I think from that angle or that question that we had, you know, what's the first thing that we're going to say? Getting to the point as quickly as possible, because that first impression is so quick. It's like quicksilver. You don't have a couple of minutes. You have seconds to grab their attention. Think of it like those hooks that you have on social media, the 5 Welsh facts or the 5 things about Welsh history, or I might say, did you know stories are 100,000 years old? And they're like, I know exactly what we're in for here. Ronseal does exactly what it says on the tin.
There you go.
I'm going to have to keep going with this metaphor with you.
I know. I will eventually get it.
I'm going to buy some Ronseal and we're going to put it to the test. Does it do what it says on the tin?
It will do what it does in the tin. I think.
What it
says in the tin.
Love it.
There you go.
Where to start?
Start there.
Where do I start?
Don't know. Start there. And if you have any tips on how you like to get started, what your process is, we'd love to hear them. Drop us a DM on our Instagram, yeah?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.